past the traditions and faith of Judaism within the land of Israel, may our adherence to those same traditions and faith be a source of enrichment and ennoblement in our lives. Grant, O Heavenly Father, that our command ever be motivated by this heritage. In peace as in war, may we always be champions of righteousness and warriors for justice. Guide our deliberations and bless us, that we may bring closer to reality your kingdom upon earth, our vision and our goal through the ages. And let us say,
Color, present the colors.
Present arms. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. I'd like to take just one moment and welcome everybody to our opening joint session and to recognize our national president, Linda Singer. Linda, where are you? Oh, there you are. Welcome. It's nice to have everybody together in solidarity and unity for what we do. It is now my pleasure to introduce the General Counsel who is performing the duties of the Deputy Secretary of the VA, the Honorable James Byrne. Now, you heard a little bit of his bio. I think we know that he's really working hard and that we are actually making some progress, for which we are all very appreciative. I don't want to take any more of your time, so the dais is yours, sir.
Dr. Snyder, thank you for that kind introduction, and all of you for that warm welcome. Thank you. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize Miss Linda Singer for your outstanding service as well, Norman Rosenshine, Herb Rosenbleeth, who I met, in my office in Washington, D.C. last week, along with my kinfolk, Mr. Greg Byrne. He's here somewhere. There he is. Same last name. I'm sure we're related somewhere back in the food chain. I am thrilled to be here. Good morning, and I'm thrilled to join you for your 124th National Convention, and I understand it's the Auxiliary's 91st convention. So congratulations. I believe you are the oldest veteran service organization in the United States. So I'm incredibly proud to be here, and it is an honor, and so thank you for inviting me. Drove down I-95 from Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia this morning. Any of you live on the East Coast, you know that's a complete crapshoot, whether it's 2 hours or a couple nods, 2 hours or 4 hours. It ended up being more of the 2-hour variant, And I was glad for that because it gave us an opportunity to visit with two organizations or areas that I'd like to share with you. And the first was the Beth Ahava Museum and Archive. We had an opportunity to spend about 40 minutes there this morning. And it was very interesting, appreciating and understanding the presence and the power of the Jewish community in the Richmond, Virginia area. But what stuck with me, and I may use this in other presentations going forward, was a quote from George Washington, first president of the United States. And that quote is essentially, he was echoing the comments of a Jewish elder. And he said, quote, "To bigotry, no sanctuary. To persecution, no assistance." And I thought that was an incredibly powerful statement that applies then and it applies now. We also took the occasion to go by the Hebrew cemetery that is here on Chico Hill. And it's in one of the oldest parts of Richmond, Virginia, a little less than 2 miles from here. And it is one of the only Jewish military cemeteries, a portion of it, outside of Israel, and I believe the only one in the United States. I will share with you that it's reverently and beautifully maintained by Richmond's Beth Ahava congregation. And within that cemetery is a segregated area with gated. It's got a fence around it with memorialized rifles and swords. Very interesting fencing. Where 30 veterans, Jewish veterans from the Civil War, are buried. Veterans from the Civil War that are not from the Richmond area but did die from their injuries or battle in the Richmond area. There are other veterans, Jewish veterans in that cemetery that are from the local area that were buried with their families. But this was Jewish veterans who were buried who were from outside of the Richmond area when they passed. And so let me take a minute to recognize your important mission, which I thought was informative of some of my comments today. And that's to install a love of country and flag and honor the memory of our heroic dead. But equally vital is your commitment, this organization's commitment, to encourage the doctrine of universal liberty, equal rights, and full justice to all men and women, and helping combat the powers of bigotry and darkness. In short, your mission is about keeping this great nation strong, and I applaud you for all of that. And for almost 125 years, that's been your business as normal for the Jewish War Veterans Organization. What I want to share with you this morning, before maybe I answer some questions, if they allow me, is that things are not normal at the VA. Business is not as usual at the VA and hasn't been for some time now. And I'm pretty excited to share with you about that transformation that's going on at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I try not to use the word transformation lightly. Transformation is a word that means a lot. It's a deep change in how we take care of our veterans, not in the mission. And we're in essentially, I think, the third transformational period that the Department of Veterans Affairs, or whatever it was named, has undertaken in our nation's history. And I want to put a little context on these transformations, to put some context on what we're doing now. The first transformation, as you might guess, was when Abraham Lincoln signed legislation that authorized the building of national homes for national homes for disabled volunteer soldiers. And then the next day he charged the nation to care for those who bore the battle. And so within a year, the first of those facilities was built in Maine, and that year period was soon after the conclusion of the Civil War. That facility in Maine was exclusively designed to take care of veterans. And that facility in Maine grew to become the largest integrated health care network in the United States. And so that was a huge transformational period for our care for our veterans, exclusively care for veterans. The second transformational period was World War I and World War II. And World War I saw 6 million veterans returning from Europe to a chaotic and maybe disjointed 4 different agencies supporting veterans. And with help of veteran service organizations like you all, we passed legislation to allow it to be centralized into a Veterans Bureau, of which was the sort of the legacy of what we're dealing with actually today. In World War II, the biggest part of that second transformation was when Omar Bradley took the helm, when 16 million service members were demobilized, some within the United States, a significant number from the European theater and the Pacific theaters back into the United States. And during that transformation period, there were sort of 3 areas I'd like to share with you. One, you know about the GI Bill and the housing guarantee loans, allowed veterans to return and join the middle class, purchase a home, raise a family, build a community. The second one was the educational opportunities that were presented to our veterans back then. It was a gamble, it was a bet. We're going to put money aside to allow veterans to get secondary or greater education. And it allowed those service members who had left their hometowns, their mining community, they had left their inner city dwelling, and they had transformed themselves essentially overseas and enlightened themselves, would be a better word, and came back hungry to do great things. They had seen the world, they had led men and women in harm's way, they were can-do people. And so we gave them the opportunity to go to college, a 4-year college, which was at that time exclusively probably for the upper class and very few people in our country. And then community colleges. There was a big boom in community colleges back then that allowed service members who were demobilized coming back to the United States to get enough education in business and other things to take them to the next level of responsibility. And then there was also trade schools. Many of them went on to trade schools to augment the great things that they had learned while they were in the service. And I don't just mean the technical skills, I mean those intangibles that all of us very, very much appreciate. And so what that education did is it allowed us to shape the balance of the 20th century and drive our post-war economic boom, which we're still in that wave today. And so a phrase I'd like to share with you is that when America invests in veterans, everyone wins. I think that's worth saying again. So I will say it again. When America invests in veterans, everybody wins. And the third part of that, and not necessarily in the order of third under Omar Bradley, was the transformation of the healthcare system. So these veterans came back, 16 million of them, 780,000 had physical injuries of war. And of course, we all know that that doesn't count the many, many hidden injuries of war that certainly came back from those theaters of combat. But it allowed authorities to transfer the care of these 780,000 service members with physical injuries from the Department of Defense over to the Veterans Bureau back then, and allowed the building of over 100 medical facilities all around the United States. And it created something called the Hometown Program of 1945. And that program allowed World War II veterans to get community care with a doctor of their choice and buy drugs from their local pharmacists. And that may sound familiar to something I'm going to talk about here in a minute regarding community care and the Mission Act and what have you. But I guarantee you that in 1945, 46, 47, no one mentioned the word privatization. Fair to say? It was about meeting veterans' needs where they lived and allowing them to actually thrive. And General Bradley was a visionary. He put many of our medical centers around the country, the 120 that were built soon after World War II, he put them near academic institutions. And we still have some of those, or most of those relationships still today. And so essentially General Bradley took the VA, because he had to, sort of, and turned it on a dime. He completely overhauled operations and he reformed the system. And these two transformational moments, or periods of time, with Abraham Lincoln and General Omar Bradley, like I said earlier, were not fundamental. There were fundamental changes at the VA, not about the mission, but about how we actually better serve the veterans. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And that's actually what I really want to share with you today, is how that transformation is occurring under the leadership of President Trump and our 10th Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Robert Wilkie. And I'll just do that by maybe sharing his priorities, and I'll put them in 4 buckets. And the first bucket is the first priority, the number one priority of the Department of Veterans Affairs right now, and that is customer service. Getting to yes. What does the veteran need, and when and how do we get it for them? And I won't say that all the other efforts that I'm about to share with you in this transformation are for naught if we don't get customer service right, but I'll just say it, right? If we don't get customer service right, if we don't treat our veterans the way the American people expect us to deliver the care and benefits and services, then all these things are all for naught. And we have some statistics. We try to monitor that with the veterans and the providers and those out in the community, and our numbers are great, and I won't bore you necessarily with the numbers, but I will share with you that Secretary Wilkie announced 2 weeks ago that the White House is looking to export our customer services across the rest of the government. So the VA is an example of customer service in the executive branch. And that's great news, having VA lead the way. The second priority right now for the Department of Veterans Affairs is the implementation of the Mission Act. And you all are very fortunate, I was fortunate, to have Mr. Darren Selnick. There you go, give me a wave. So I don't want to be too dramatic by saying he was the father of the Mission Act, but I think that folks have referred to him as that. And he was there until recently to help us launch it well on its way and succeeding and helping us provide the care and benefits to veterans that they deserve under this Mission Act. And the Mission Act is you can get care in your community if the VA facility is too long of a drive. The Mission Act, you can get care in your community if VA doesn't have the care you need. And you can finally get what your neighbors have always had, and that's urgent care that is close to your home without driving hours to a VA facility. Very similar to what I talked about with Omar Bradley and the hometown program of 1945. It's about what's best for you as veterans. It's about giving you choice. The president says that often. He implemented choice, and he actually did. We are executing on giving veterans choice about their care, promoting independence in the veterans' health care as well as in their families. It's the VA's job to work with you to get you the care you need, whether it's inside or outside the VA. So I'd like to share with you what I call the next bucket, and that is the modernization efforts that are going on at the VA right now. And there are a lot of them. And it is in the double, triple hard category of all the modernization efforts that are underway at the VA. And that is being done, and it has to be done. But at the same time, we can't degrade the care, benefits, and services that we're providing to our veterans. And some of those modernization efforts are the IT infrastructure needs to be modernized across this vast enterprise. It has been, I won't use the word neglected because that's a pretty strong word, but it has not been tended to properly over the last couple decades. And almost everything we do relies upon an IT backbone, IT infrastructure to allow us to do that. And so we're investing that with clear guidance to our Assistant Secretary for Office of Information Technology and our CIO. You will not degrade any of the care, benefits, and services that we're providing. So essentially, you need to rebuild this bridge, but don't slow down traffic going over it. And you can picture that in my head, that's how I look at things, very physical. That's nearly, I won't say impossible, because we're going to pull it off, but it's incredibly difficult. We're also modernizing the supply chain. And you can imagine that when you purchase $27 billion worth of goods and services every year, supply chain is incredibly important. Things need to be available when you need them, where you need them, and you need to purchase to be good stewards of the taxpayer money. And so that was not being done as well as it could or should have been done over the last many years, and we partnered with the Defense Logistics Agency over at the Department of Defense to ensure that we have a better supply chain so that our providers have what they need when they need. The story that you may have heard or that's been told by leaders from time to time is a true story, and it's a sad story, and it probably happened more often than we would like to think, that a surgeon was operating on a veteran and needed a particular tool or utensil and turned to his right or left, however they do that in the operating room, and said, "I need an X." And they said, "We don't have an X." He goes, "Well, I really need an X." And so he said, "Well, hang on." And so I guess it's called descrubbing, right, when you unscrub. runs across the street to a private hospital with a credit card, and fortunately they had X piece of gear. He buys it with a credit card and runs back. Now, you know that didn't happen in 30 seconds. That happened in a while, and the veteran was under anesthesia and unconscious while it was going on. And so that's a horrible example, but unfortunately a true example of how the supply chain had failed that particular veteran and those providers at that particular time. And so that's one example, but we do know that we were not having the economy of scale that we needed when we were purchasing things. We know that things were not available. So the partnership made a lot of sense, and it's underway right now to do better in that regard. We also had financial business transformation going on right now. Who's going to pay for these services out in the community? Who's going to pay for, or how are we going to pay for those supplies and those services that we contract for? How are we going to pay our employees? And God bless the OIT folks and everybody else. They patched these together over the last couple decades. Now we're modernizing that system at the same time. The HR system's being modernized. And we have appeals modernization. Hopefully you're getting positive feedback that the appeals modernization and the delays are significantly going down each week as we work through those. And so there's a lot of transformation efforts going on. In a second, I'll talk to you about electronic health records modernization, which is a $16 billion effort, and that is an initiative within itself. But these other efforts are huge. Everything we do in the VA is huge, but they're well overdue. I tell folks, before I was in the government in the Marine Corps most of my adult life, I suppose, but I spent a little bit of time, well, not 9 years, in the private sector with a defense contractor, very disciplined. It did very well for itself. It continues to support our nation's warfighters very well. And I got to tell you, if our senior leadership team had taken on these modernization efforts all at the same time and all these other initiatives, the whole leadership team would be fired, because that's too disruptive to an organization. It wouldn't be wise to be disruptive to an organization such as this defense contractor, or any agency for that matter. So it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. What we're doing is dangerous, and it's hard, and well, it is. It's hard, and there's a danger in it, but it has to be done. And it has to be done because it's well overdue, and the veterans and the taxpayers deserve us to modernize these efforts and move forward. And by the way, those efforts look nothing like any effort to privatize, because I didn't get the memo if that's actually what we're trying to do at the VA. And that's not what the leadership team is doing with all these modernization efforts. So let me share with you, and I missed a couple, and I don't know why, but there's like one or two more that are going on that are of that same proportion. The fourth bucket I'll share with you is about our collaboration with the Department of Defense. And I have the privilege of serving on the Joint Executive Council with my counterpart on the Department of Defense on various initiatives and efforts that we have that have overlapping interests. And right, the service member and the veteran are the same person, except one day they're a service member, the next day they're a veteran, right? So you get the relationship, the natural synergies between the two of us. Now, I do need to highlight that a service member is, on average, in the military, maybe 6 years on average, right? Most of them do a 4-year stint and get out and become veterans. Some go on for 20 and 30 years, but the average person, service member, is in for maybe 6 to 7 years at the most. And they're young and they're healthier, right? We get the veterans for 50 years. We're excited about that. We love our veterans, but we realize that we get them in all stages of their life, and we get them for 50 to 70 plus years. And we work on various initiatives with the Department of Defense that you can imagine. Credentialing and badges. We work on transitioning service members in becoming veterans, and how we can help them just accelerate their careers when they leave the military. Really important initiatives. But there's two that I want to share with you today that I'd like you to take away with you. And that is electronic health records modernization is the big one. That $16 billion effort to modernize how we treat our veterans and how we gather information on their treatment, from when they stand on the yellow footprints in boot camp all the way through the end of their life. We want to have a picture of this veteran's treatment and care and situation. And the reality is healthcare in the United States is awesome, but it needs to go to the next level. And what VA is doing with electronic health records modernization is It's taking health care for veterans to the next level. And because we're so big, the rest of the nation is going to actually follow. And where I'm going with that is the simple explanation is that your record as a service member gets translated in, gets transferred over to the VA so that we see that same record. Yes, that's a very small piece of what electronic health records modernization does. And we should be excited about that transfer because many of you in this room carried your medical records under your arm, maybe lost it, maybe you didn't, right? And then you went into your VSO to help you out, to file for maybe some claims and benefits. It was scanned or it wasn't scanned, or it was lost or it wasn't lost. So those days are all gone. I just want to share with you all, because I had the same deal, to file under your arm. Those days are gone, but that's only a piece of how awesome electronic health records modernization is going to be. It allows your provider in the VA, which is the center of your care, to have a holistic picture of everything that you've had provided by the medical community. And when you go out and get community care, when you go out and get a dermatology appointment out in town because of distance or timing and the VA is not able to provide it, that dermatologist isn't just quizzing you about all of your, how many surgeries have you had, or what's your medications, he's not, that provider is not relying on you. And unfortunately, I think you know that it's a reality for the most part. When you go outside the VA system for community care, it's sort of self-disclosure on your part. You're telling them what that provider should know. And with this new system, that provider will be able to pull up everything from when our veterans stood on the yellow footprints to get a holistic picture of that veteran's care and be able to provide better care and diagnosis and medication for all of them. It'll track medications to ensure we're not double medicating a veteran. It'll also allow us to do analytics to see if there's trends or other concerns about veterans that serve in a particular area or from a particular demographic. All kinds of things so we can try to get ahead and create that wellness that veterans actually deserve. And so I'm really excited about electronic health records modernization. It's rolling out next year up in the Northwest, and it's going to roll out across the country over the next several years. And we are the leaders of doing that. And by the way, that is a hard undertaking. By the way, we're talking about billions of records, billions with a B, billions of records that we have to deal with. As a matter of fact, looking at my notes, it's 78 billion records that we have compiled from all of our medical centers on all of our veterans. And we're putting those into our system with Cerner so that they'll be accessible for those providers out in town and then back in the VA. And so we're one step closer toward interoperability between the community and the VA. So the second part of that collaboration with DoD that I want to share with all of you, and I leave it sort of at the end, and I assure you that's not because it's not important. It's incredibly important. It's something that the leadership team at the VA talks about, thinks about every day. Our president talks about it and thinks about it, and that is suicide prevention. And right now, we're not winning. And we have some great programs. And I'll tell you a little bit about them, but I'm going to tell you that we are not moving the needle in the right direction. And I'll tell you about one of the programs is we have a veteran crisis line up in upstate New York, and there's another office, I think, in Tennessee. But it's a 24-hour hotline for veterans who are in crisis to be able to get help. And if they need emergency intervention, and it's possible, they arrange for emergency intervention. 1,800 calls a day go into that line, 80 of which require emergency intervention, meaning that if the veteran is expressing an intent to harm themselves, the person on the call, assuming we know where they are, will have emergency medical services and law enforcement maybe around the block from the veteran on call to intervene if it looks like it's going to become a very, very bad situation. That's a lot of interventions. That's a lot of phone calls that are going to this emergency crisis line. And then in our hospitals, the latest number I have, and I think it's a low ball, but it's 260 interventions within our medical centers of veterans that were in the process of trying to take their own lives. That's not ideations or just talk. They're in the process of trying to harm themselves. I think that number is a low ball, to be quite honest with you. And so that is on this end. Those are the diving catches, right? We have those. What there is, and we're not going to let up on that. We have to have that safety net there at the end. But we have other programs that we have that address some of the underlying issues that lead a veteran to think that their life is not worth living. And that's taking away some of their financial insecurities where we can, instability where we can, taking away their homelessness if that's the case. And then mental health. And there's a focus on mental health, though it is not the complete driver that drives a veteran to take their lives. Most veterans actually who take their lives and American citizens who take their lives don't necessarily have a diagnosable mental health issue up until that time. And so we're addressing that with programs. We have 400 crisis intervention, they're called suicide counselors. There's another name for them I can't recall off the top of my head. There are 400 people that are assigned essentially sort of man-to-man or woman-to-woman or man-to-woman coverage of veterans that we think are at risk for taking their own lives and harming themselves. And we do that through some analytics. There's a program called Reach Vet, where we take this data that we have and we go, that veteran fits a profile and may not even know at this point that they may have suicidal ideations or thoughts. And so very subtly, very respectfully, these folks reach out to these veterans to ensure that their basic needs are being taken care of. And just a lot of it is letting them know that a community cares and that someone's watching out for them and that there's resources to help them on everything from mental health to housing to benefits and things along that line. And so those are things that are going on right now. But the one I want to share with you are two executive orders that came out recently. One came out in January. President Trump put out an announcement that newly discharged service members at whatever category of discharge have up to a year free mental health care services from the VA. We'll bring them in and we'll stabilize them as quickly as possible for that, regardless of what their disability rating is, regardless of the type of discharge that they have. And they did that in conjunction with DOD and Homeland Security. And that's great. But let me tell you about the one that I'm actually really excited about. And that is the one where the executive order directed the White House and Mr. Wilkie, the secretary, to be co-chairs of a program to create a framework for harnessing the resources of this great nation to take care of our veterans and prevent suicide. Plain and simple. Acknowledging that it's horrible in the general population, and understanding that it's 1.5 times it impacts the veteran population, 1.5 times what it impacts the regular population in the United States. He's directed us to harness the resources of the federal government at large, all of the agencies, the resources of the VSOs, the academic world, private industry, and anybody that can contribute to the challenge of reducing the number of suicides in this country, particularly in the veteran population. And so what that means is it's an acknowledgement by the VA to say, hey, listen, if we look at the numbers, there's 20 a day, horrendous, maybe more, right? 20 that we know of, 6 of which are under VA care. Well, golly, let's get the remainder under VA care because there's a much better probability that they will not take their lives if we can get them some care and treatment. And what the reality of this is going, yes, we want them to come to the VA, but really we want them to thrive in the communities where they are. And if they get help from the church down the street, if they get help from your VSO, if they get help from a neighbor, we don't care. We want veterans to thrive and be well in their communities and where they are. And so this is a whole nation effort. And so that I am challenging all of you to partner with us, with the VA, partner with the president to address this horrible challenge that we have in our nation right now. Another challenge we have is with the opioid epidemic, and that is a contributor, of course, to suicide and other bad things. And our partnership with all of you is tremendously important in that way as well. So I believe Secretary Wilkie visited your national headquarters and museum in last June, and I've had the privilege of visiting the museum as well with my family. And when I walk in, there's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that's inscribed on the wall that sticks with me. And it reads, "Americanism is a question of spirit, conviction, purpose, not of creed or birthright." And that, I think, is a very, very powerful statement. So it is a great time to celebrate. Next year will be 125 years of the Jewish War Veterans Organization. It'll be a great year to celebrate all the wonderful things that you've done for our nation over those 125 years. And you all have done a lot. You're a solid, performing veteran service organization. I am incredibly honored to be here. I hope that you all have a very, I heard some pretty robust discussion right before I was walking in this morning. So I love that. I love the passion. And I hope you guys have a great and productive convention. I want to thank all of you. I hope God blesses all of you and your families. And I will stay around for a few more minutes as long as I'm allowed to answer questions. So thank you.
Could we have someone bring the question cards up front, please?
So sure, there's a lot of paperwork here about West Los Angeles, but I believe I understand the issue. If I'm wrong, please raise your hand and tell me that I totally missed the mark. There are a lot of issues in West Los Angeles that we are in the process of addressing, and they're all very, very serious, significant homeless population challenge in West Los Angeles. But I believe the question is about a meeting site on our facilities for your organization. And as much as it pains me to give you the answer to that, is that our authority, our charter allows us to have veteran service organizations and other organizations on our facilities using our resources, taxpayer-funded resources, to help veterans with things such as claims. And so if that's what was going on or what will be going on, that is certainly welcome on our facilities, assuming that there is space, and that's something we probably would be wise to make space for. But if it's just for meetings and what have you, as much as we love you guys and other organizations, that doesn't quite fit into what our statutory authorities, like the law, allows us to do. A little more comments about West Los Angeles. I will tell you, it may feel as though your organization was picked on back then, because I know I cringed when the determination was made and the information was sent to you. You are not. We are very fond of you all. And there are other organizations maybe we're not as fond of, and I shouldn't have said that, but there's other organizations, like there's a parrot sanctuary. Not to compare you all with parrot sanctuaries, but I don't know how a parrot sanctuary got on the facility at West Los Angeles. There's no statutory authority for that. The parrot sanctuary is being removed. There's a Shakespeare Theater that goes on every year there. We've asked them to remove themselves from that facility as well. And so they've all made good arguments that somehow they help veterans. The statute's pretty clear. Things like benefits, things like helping with claims. That's what we would allow our facilities to be used for. So I hope you all understand that we may want to do something, but we can't. And we have to follow the law. So I believe that's what this is about. If not, please correct me or dress me down and tell me I missed the mark. All right, hearing no comments, I must have done all right. And Darren's from West Los Angeles, so he's smiling. Did I say it right, Darren? Darren knows all, by the way, just to be clear on this. Was I all right, Darren? Or you weren't listening to what I'm saying? You're like, I'm sick of hearing you, Jim. What? It's complicated. It's a very fair way of saying that. Very, very fair way of saying it. This other question, and forgive me, I don't have my glasses, but it says, when will the VA be given a line item in the federal budget with a Secretary of Veteran Affairs in the cabinet? This is a real customer service with a director. Well, I will tell you, since 1976, we have been members of the cabinet, one of the big 12, I think it's 12. The secretary reports directly to the president. We have our own individual budget tucked up under the NDDA. And so we don't have line item veto matters within our budget, and that's probably a good thing. And I will share this with you, why I think that's a good thing, not necessarily for public consumption, but we have a president who has made taking care of veterans the central theme of one of the main central themes of his campaign, and he's delivered on that for the last 2.5 years. We also have a Congress that on both sides of the aisle is very supportive of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And my colleagues in other government agencies, they cannot say that. They don't have support on both sides of the aisles. Washington, D.C. is a rough town. I don't know how many folks live there, but it's a mean town, right? A couple people smiling. It is a very, very mean town. I got to tell you, though, we are provided, I would never say they're overfloweth, right? But our coffers are full at the VA. It's a matter of us executing and providing those benefits and services and care that the veterans deserve and doing it in a fiscally responsible manner, being good stewards of the taxpayer money. So we do have the money to do this. And so I don't know that having line item veto would be beneficial to us. Having some flexibility in being able to move monies would be, the more we can move the money, the better, I think, just as sort of a businessman at heart, would be great. But to let you know, we have a seat at the table. Secretary Wilkie has a very close relationship with the president. He's incredibly well respected, and we have a very, very healthy budget going into the next right now and then going into the next year. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one here. It says, will the VA medical record be compatible with the Epic system that civilian hospitals?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. That's part of the interoperability, and it won't just be Epic. There's other systems out there too. Scripps is one, and there's several others. And then even the smaller mom and pop organizations that don't subscribe to the bigger electronic health records modernization software programs will be able to link with our Cerner product at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So great question. Epic is pretty prevalent around the United States. It's got a big market share. So that's an obvious important link that we need to have that interoperability in the community. But it's not just Epic. It's not just the other big three. We want to be able to link to any provider in the community anywhere where we send a veteran, right? But if someone's on Epic, that's going to be one of the first priorities because it's bigger. Does that make sense? So the question was, how long do we think the rollout will actually last? And so the projected rollout is 10 years. And if you're going like this, like I am, 10 years is a long time. I will share with you, and I prefer not to read this in the paper, we want to go a lot faster than 10 years. And we're going to have a whole lot better idea of how successful we're going to be next year when we roll it out for our first sites where we flip on the switches. What I will tell you is we've done a lot of prep work to roll it out in Washington State, the 3 sites out there in Spokane and Seattle. We've also done a lot of work for the next VISNs as we roll it out too. That's what's been going on over the last 1.5 years. And so I am really confident that the groundwork, the preparation we've done is going to allow us to accelerate that 10 years. 10 years is a long, long time. And I have to tell you, I have the privilege of going and visiting medical center leadership and the veterans and the providers in these hospitals. And across the board, I hear medical center directors take me aside, kind of like working me a little bit, going, hey, can you move our medical center up on the list to get the rollout of EHRM, to get the Cerner product? And there may be some flexibility. I can't just say, hey, I like you, I'm going to move you to the top of the list. But there's an energy for it. But we'll have a much better picture, sir, to answer your question next year. I'm optimistic. I hope we're going to roll it out faster. But let me just give you this. This is the word of caution that always goes with that question, is we will not degrade the care to our veterans. It's a little bit of that example that I used about IT modernization. Is we're building this bridge, if you will, but the traffic still got to flow, right? The traffic has to flow unimpeded and what have you. So that's the challenge, and that may be why we are being very, very cautious, I think wisely in the beginning. But there is a desire to put the pedal to the metal and move out. I will share one thing with you. A decision was made that I am accountable for. The Secretary, of course, accountable for everything, and that is to accelerate the rollout of the scheduling tool in parallel with the EHRM matter. So essentially, the country is going to have an amazing scheduling tool within 4 to 5 years, maybe quicker, across the country. Not the whole suite of offerings, but it's going to have the scheduling component, which, as you know, is pretty darn important. And so, did I answer your question, sir?
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them. It says, when will the funds for the Vietnam Vets Blue Water Bill be released?
So, January 1, 2020, we will start processing claims. At the first minute of that day, we're ready to process those claims. What I would charge you with, or ask you to help us with, is file those claims if you think you're eligible, and encourage people in your community and in your organization to do that as well. We are being deliberate about this. And January 1st of 2020 is when we'll be ready to process these claims. You can appreciate that this is a monumental effort, that we want to be sure that we're doing right. And so the first day, January of 2020, we'll be ready to start processing these claims, retroactive back to when the filers are claimed and forward. So I don't know if that answers that question. And just for what it's worth, this is in the hard category. Let me just tell you one thing that's harder than I actually appreciated. For example, the ship law, we have plenty of folks in the naval service here, right? Marines and sailors, right? Plenty? But what I was in, that was done with pencil, right? In a logbook, right? Grid coordinates, pencil, book. That's what the logs are done. Those are the logs we're looking at right now. We're processing those. We're entering that data into the system to determine whether a ship went within 12 nautical miles. And the 12 nautical miles isn't as easy as you think when you got a coastline that goes like this. So those are things we're making sure we get right. So I wanted to pass that on to you, that there's been a lot of effort making this happen right now. The question was about funds. This is mandatory funding. It will be paid for. Taxpayers will write the check. This is not discretionary. The Secretary doesn't go, well, we're going to pay it, we're not going to. No, it's mandatory funding. We will pay those claims.
Thank you so much for taking your time and giving us all of this great information. We do have for you, I'd like to present you with this certificate. A contribution has been made to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History in honor of James Byrne, Department of Veteran Affairs, presented by the Jewish War Veterans of the United States, signed by our Executive Director, the Chairman of the Steering Committee, and myself. So I want to present that to you. Let's turn it around. And then on a personal note, I would just like to present you with one of my personal challenge coins. And thank you for being here, and thank you for your service as a Marine as well. At this point, if everyone would please rise while we escort our honored guest out. Past Master Commander Goldwasser, please escort our guests to the room. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Please remain standing until such time as our guest has left and the officer of the day closes the altar. Officer of the day, please close the altar so we can go into recess. Thank you. Let me remind everyone our next meeting is at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Until such time, we stand in recess.
It's very lovely. Oh, Maxwell, I hardly recognized you. That's a good